Annie sat on the bed, smiling up at Sam as he stood in front of her. She gently pulled his shirt from his pants, unbuttoning it and letting it fall to the floor. With soft kisses on his stomach and chest, Sam closed his eyes, letting out a slight moan. Slowly, Annie leaned back, her smile lingering as Sam steadied himself by holding onto her shoulders, squeezing them tightly. After a moment, Sam collapsed onto the bed, catching his breath. Annie took the opportunity to undress and join him, lying close. She pulled Sam up the bed and kissed him deeply, then looked into his eyes and said, "Enough of this. I need you now." Sam responded to her without hesitation, holding her close before they both collapsed onto the bed, exhausted. They lay there for a while, catching their breath, before getting up to take a shower and dress to return to work. Before they left the room, Annie pulled Sam in for one last kiss. "Listen, that was amazing, but we can't do this again," Annie said. "You said that last week too, but you know you can't get enough of this," Sam replied. "I know, but Jason is acting funny, and I think he may be getting suspicious. And that whole deal with your wife trying to call you last week has made me a little nervous. While this may be incredible, I'm not willing to risk my marriage over it." "Okay, I hear you," Sam replied. "You're right. We need to take a break for a while until things settle down. I don't want to lose Kathy either." At that point, I had seen enough. I picked up my laptop and slammed it against the nearest wall. This betrayal was too much to bear, and if I ever got my hands on Sam, he would regret it. But before I could do anything, my office door opened slightly, and my assistant Sally hesitantly stuck her head in. "Are you okay, Mr. Winters?" she asked. Taking a deep breath, I replied, "Yes, Sally, I'm fine. I'm sorry if I frightened you. I think I'm going to leave for the day and head to the gym. I have some things I need to work through, and I think a hard workout may help me." "Oh, and Sally, could you arrange for a new laptop?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Winters. I'll get on that right now." With that, I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Jason Winters, and that was my wife of almost 25 years in that video. We met in college, and after dating for 2 years, we married just after graduation. As far as I knew, we had a great marriage for all those years and 3 wonderful kids. I guess I was wrong. This all started a few days ago when Kathy Mason, Sam's wife, came to see me, concerned that there was something going on between her husband and my wife. If not for her, I would still be oblivious to what was happening right under my nose in my own house. 3 days earlier, Sally had informed me, "Mr. Winters, I have a Mrs. Mason in the lobby to see you. She said that her husband Sam works with your wife and that it's urgent she speaks with you." "Thank you, Sally." "Did she say what this was about?" "No, sir, she just said it was personal. Tell her I'll be there in a few minutes." I had a bad feeling about this. Why would a woman I had only met once at a company Christmas party be coming to see me about a personal issue? It was only 11 a.m., and I had done nothing all day but put out fires. And now this? What's worse is that it's only Monday. Maybe it was time to scrap my rule of no drinking until after 5 p.m. I walked into the lobby and saw a pretty brunette sitting on the sofa. "Mrs. Mason, I'm Jason Winters. Please come back to my office, and we can talk." "Thank you, but please call me Kathy," she said as she stood to shake my hand. "Okay, well, follow me, Kathy, and please call me Jason," I replied as I led her around the corner into my office and shut the door. "Please have a seat and tell me what's on your mind," I said, motioning to the sofa in the corner of the office. As she crossed the room, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she was. Kathy Mason had shoulder-length black hair, and while some might say she was 10 to 15 pounds overweight, to me, it looked like she had curves in all the right places. I took a seat in one of the chairs facing the sofa and noticed that her hands were shaking as she tried to collect her thoughts. "Jason, I don't really know how to say this, so I'm just going to be blunt. I believe my husband is having an affair with your wife, and I was hoping you could help me prove it. I don't know if you've suspected anything, but I can show you what I know, and we can start from there if that's okay with you. Wow. Not only was Kathy beautiful, but her accusation seemed extreme. I didn't know her husband very well, but I knew my Annie, and the last thing I believed she would do was cheat on me and our kids. However, I could see that the only way out of this situation was to listen to Kathy and try to reassure her that she might be overthinking things. Well, Kathy, please excuse my skepticism, but this is really hard to believe. Show me what you have, and let's see where it leads, I told her. She took a couple of deep breaths to calm herself and collect her thoughts before beginning. Okay, last Thursday, I was in town running some errands and decided to surprise Sam at the office to see if he wanted to grab lunch. But when I got there, he wasn't in his office. I asked around and was told that he left for lunch around 11 a.m. I thought that was strange since I had packed him a lunch that morning like I do every day. So, thinking he might be running some errands, I tried to call him to see if he wanted to meet me somewhere, but he didn't answer. I could see tears forming in the corners of her eyes as she paused for a moment. At this point, I knew I needed to get her through this story before she broke down. I handed her a box of tissues from the table and asked, "So, where does Annie come into this?" She wiped her eyes and nose before continuing. When he still hadn't returned my call by the time I got home, I started to worry because that just wasn't like him. Then it hit me, about 6 months ago, when our oldest son started driving, I downloaded one of those apps that tracks your location by your cell phone. I knew it also tracked mine and Sam's phones, so I pulled up the app and found his location. It was at an address about 15 minutes from his office, in a neighborhood I didn't recognize. When I searched for that address online, your name came up, and I remembered you and your wife from the Christmas party. I was still skeptical, but the situation was becoming more suspicious. I would have to ask Annie about this later. So, Kathy, I asked, did you ask Sam why he was at my house in the middle of the day? No, but let me finish. The app also tracks everywhere you've been for the past 90 days, so I pulled up Sam's history and found that he has been going to your house every Thursday for the past 3 weeks. He would leave his office at 11 a.m., arrive at your house around 11:15 a.m., stay there until around 1 p.m., and then drive back to his office. That's when I knew what was going on. When I asked him that evening why he hadn't called me back, he told me he was with a client. I can't think of but one reason why he would lie to me. I could feel the anger building inside me as she spoke, but I managed to stay calm. Kathy was just the messenger, and she was clearly hurting. It was my turn to take a few deep breaths and compose myself. Then it hit me, the history on my security system could confirm if she was right. So, I pulled up the system on my phone app and scrolled back 3 weeks. There it was, Annie had disarmed the system at 11:15 a.m. and rearmed it at 1 p.m. I found similar entries for the next 2 Thursdays, but nothing suspicious before that. Kathy sat there quietly crying while I paced the floor, trying to figure out what to do. Then I had an idea. I picked up the phone and called my friend Bill Stevenson. "Hey, Bill, I know it's short notice, but could you come over to my office as soon as possible? I have an urgent matter I need your help with." Bill confirmed he would be there in about 10 minutes. I explained to Kathy that Bill was my security system contractor. I develop residential and commercial properties, and Bill installs the security systems for all my projects, including my house. My plan was to get photographic proof of whatever was going on before we confronted our spouses. Bill arrived as promised, and after I told him the situation, he laid out exactly what we needed to do if we were sure we really wanted to know the truth. "Just be certain this is what you want, Jason. Once you see the pictures, you'll never be able to get those images out of your head." I looked at Kathy, and she nodded in agreement. So I told Bill, "Let's do this, and let the pieces fall where they may." Bill explained that my current security system wouldn't be much help. The cameras inside the house were motion activated but only when the system was armed, designed to ensure privacy. However, he could install some small, high-definition cameras in whichever rooms I chose. These would give us crystal-clear video and audio of everything going on in those rooms. I gave him the go-ahead, and he promised to get everything installed the next day after Annie left for work. The plan was to install 3 cameras each in the master bedroom, the guest bedroom, and the great room. Bill promised he could set up the cameras to provide a 360-degree view of everything in those rooms. The cameras would be motion-activated and capable of automatically adjusting to capture clear footage at any time, day or night. The cameras transmitted a signal to a receiver that Bill installed in my attic, and I could monitor the feed through a phone app. The video would also be saved to the cloud in case I needed it later. Now, all we had to do was keep our cool for a couple of days and see what we uncovered. That was easier said than done. I kept myself busy with work and even worked from my home office in the evenings after dinner to avoid lengthy conversations with Annie. Kathy had it a bit easier, her kids were still at home, so she stayed busy with their activities. With 2 teenage boys, she was constantly running around, leaving little time alone with Sam in the evenings. At my house, it was just me and Annie, which made things harder. All our kids were off at college, our daughter Savannah, a senior, and our twin boys, Mark and Jeff, sophomores. They all attended the same college where Annie and I met. I spent most of Tuesday and Wednesday evenings alone in my office, trying to figure out how to tell them about everything that was going on. Finally, Thursday arrived. That morning, Annie kissed me goodbye when I left, just as she had done every other day for the past 25 years. Since Monday, I had been trying to recall any strange changes in her behavior over the past 3 weeks, but there wasn't much. The only thing that stood out was that she had been more assertive in bed on the weekends, something unusual for her. Normally, she let me take the lead, but she had started taking charge more often. At the time, I liked it, until I realized what might have caused the change. That brings us to today. After watching the video from earlier, once the 2 had left my house, I downloaded the footage to my laptop, emailed a copy to Kathy, and sat down to watch it in my office. Now, I just had to figure out what to do next, preferably something that wouldn't land me in jail. On my way to the gym, I called Roger Cochran, my attorney, and explained the situation to him. He said he would draw up divorce papers, filing on the basis of adultery. Normally, it takes around 12 months to complete a divorce in our state, but there's a loophole for adultery that allows it to be finalized in just 3 months. I had no intention of dragging this out. I also made another call to my good friend Ted Jackson, who happens to be the area vice president at the bank where both Annie and Sam Mason work. Ted has financed almost all of my projects over the past 20 years, and he owes me a lot of favors. I intended to collect on a few of those favors now. I explained what was happening, told him I would send him the evidence, and expressed my confidence that he would handle the situation appropriately for 2 employees engaging in an inappropriate relationship during work hours. He assured me he would take care of everything and that I would be fully satisfied with his actions. 2 hours later, after a long workout and a shower, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to face Annie at some point. On the way home, I played a playlist on my phone and used some of the techniques I had learned in college while preparing for big football games. These techniques always helped me clear my mind and focus with laser-like precision on the task at hand. I pulled into the garage, parked in my usual spot, and headed into the house, where I found Annie in the kitchen working on dinner, just like every night. "Hi honey, how was your day?" she asked, smiling at me over her shoulder. "Not great," I grunted as I dropped my briefcase and headed to the bar for a drink. "Oh honey, I'm sorry. Is there anything I can do to help?" she asked. "As a matter of fact, there is," I replied. "Take a break and come into the den with me for a second. I have something I need you to see." She came in and sat beside me on the sofa, rubbing my thigh with her hand. "Okay, so what exactly is it that you want to show me?" I took out my phone, pulled up the video app, turned the volume up, and handed her the phone. She watched the screen for a moment, and then a look of horror crossed her face as she realized what she was seeing. "Oh," she mumbled, panic setting in as the video continued to play. "No, baby, please, I can explain," she pleaded, dropping my phone on the floor. "It's not what you think." That was it. At that moment, all the patience and self-control I had maintained throughout the week vanished, replaced by the hurt I had been feeling. I exploded. "What the hell is it that you want to explain? You don't have to explain anything to me, the video is pretty clear. It's blatantly obvious that I'm married to someone who has been lying and cheating, who cares more about herself and some fling than about the man who has loved her for 27 years or her children." I calmed myself down and noticed that she was sobbing into her hands. "Please, Jason, I know I messed up badly, but please don't call me those horrible names. I'm so sorry. Can I make it up to you somehow? Call you names?" I retorted. "I'm not calling you names, I'm just stating the facts." "Lying?" "Yep, that's what you've been doing since you started your affair." "Cheating?" "Yep, that video proves it. As far as being sorry, the only thing you're sorry about is getting caught. You sure didn't look sorry while you were with him." My face was flushed, and I could feel my heart racing in my chest. I closed my eyes and took a few deep breaths to calm myself before I lost control. When I opened my eyes, Annie was curled up in a fetal position, still sobbing. "Okay, Jason," I whispered to myself, "get it together. Just explain the options and get out of here." "Listen, Annie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I want you to be clear on your options at this point. Roger is drawing up divorce papers as we speak. You will be served with them next week, and you'll need to take them to a lawyer to have them reviewed. I think I'm being very fair in what I'm offering, half the equity in the house, half the retirement accounts, and $5,000 per month for 12 months. You've got 2 weeks to sign them to avoid going to court, where I will be forced to present that video. It's your choice." With that, I got up, went upstairs, packed some clothes, and headed to my car. "I'll send someone to get the rest of my things," I said as I walked out. "You can stay here until the divorce is final. I can't stand the thought of being in this house after everything that's happened." I paused for a moment, looking back at my home of 20 years, then slammed the door, leaving her sobbing on the sofa. When I left my house, I drove straight to the apartment that my secretary, Sally, had arranged. Over the past few years, whenever my company developed an apartment complex, I began including 4 to 5 furnished units for short-term executive rentals. These units were popular with foreign companies, and they normally rented for about 4 times the usual rate. Who would have thought I would end up living in one of them? I opened the door, dropped my bags in the entryway, and collapsed into one of the chairs in the living area, suddenly feeling exhausted. Just then, my phone buzzed. "Who the heck keeps calling?" I muttered, pulling the phone out of my pocket to see 12 missed calls, 8 from Annie, 2 from my daughter Savannah, and 1 each from my sons. What part of "don't call me" does she not understand? I quickly deleted all of Annie's calls before returning Savannah's. "Daddy, are you okay?" She answered. "Baby, I'm fine. What's going on?" I replied. "Well, Mom called about an hour ago looking for you." She sounded really upset, and when I asked her what was wrong, she said you two had some kind of fight, and that you stormed out of the house and won't answer her calls. That doesn't sound like you, so I got scared that something might have happened. Well, that didn't take long, I thought. "Savannah, I can assure you that nothing has happened to me. What your mother failed to tell you is that we were arguing because she decided I wasn't good enough for her. So, she found someone else and started sneaking him into the house. So it wasn't exactly a fight, it was more like I'm divorcing her, and I never want to see her again. Now she thinks she can explain it all away if I'll just listen to her. But it'll be a cold day in hell before I listen to any more of her lies." I suddenly realized I was raising my voice at my daughter and paused to catch my breath. It was then that I heard her crying on the other end. Well, I obviously didn't handle that very well, did I? I told myself. I managed to get my emotions in check and explained everything to Savannah, making sure she understood that this didn't have to come between her and her mother. This was between Annie and me, and I wanted her to maintain her relationship with both of us. After I hung up with Savannah, I called Mark and Jeff to let them know what was going on. Unfortunately for Annie, they both inherited my temper, and they were both really upset with her. They'll eventually make peace with her, but she will face a lot of anger from them before everything settles down. The next few weeks passed by fairly quietly. I buried myself in work and the gym, trying to stay too busy to think about the chaos my life had become. My only social contacts outside of work were my kids and Kathy Mason. I talked to the kids several times each week. The boys kept the conversations focused on school and sports, while Savannah would catch me up on what was happening with her, though she also tried to bring up Annie, who, according to my daughter, was not doing well at all. Kathy Mason and I met for lunch every Monday. It might not have been the best idea, given our circumstances, but we both needed someone to talk to, someone who understood what we were going through. I was moving full speed ahead with the divorce, but Kathy was having some second thoughts. It was different for her, she still had children at home, and a divorce would be much messier for her and Sam. She often used me as a sounding board for the decisions she was facing. On the last day before her deadline, Roger informed me that Annie had finally signed the papers and returned them to his office. Now it was just a matter of waiting the 3 months for a court date to finalize the agreement. Annie had only one request, that I let her talk to me before we go to court. Despite my objections, Roger made it clear that things would go much smoother in court if I met with her. He said that most judges wouldn't look favorably on a spouse who was ending a 25-year marriage without any counseling or at least some honest discussions between the two parties. I finally agreed to meet with her, but only when I was ready. Over the next month, I reverted back to my old habits before I met Annie. I worked hard, worked out like a madman, and played hard. My business required me to be out of town a couple of nights each week, and most of those nights included dinner and drinks, usually at a bar after work. I am a creature of habit, so this was a pattern I had followed for years. But normally, after a couple of drinks and some conversations with whoever was sitting near me at the bar, I would head back to my room and call Annie and the kids. There would sometimes be some harmless flirting with other patrons, but it never went beyond that. I'm not proud to admit it, but since Annie shattered our marriage, I found myself drinking more than I should when I was on the road. The harmless flirting started to get out of hand. I ended up getting involved with a few women I met while traveling. Some were single, and some were married, but I didn't care. I was furious with Annie for what she did, and I hated Sam for involving himself in my marriage. Now I had allowed myself to do the same thing to others. I was searching for anything to make the hurt go away, but nothing seemed to work. During this time, Kathy Mason and I continued to meet for lunch each week. We had even gone out on a few occasions in the evenings. We didn't call them dates, but we were both lonely, and sometimes you just need to spend time with a friendly face. It was certainly more satisfying to me than the brief encounters I had on the road. There was no romantic relationship, but I had kissed her goodnight a few times, lingering a little longer than I probably should have on more than one occasion. One Monday night, Kathy and I were out for dinner, and I noticed that she was quieter than usual, just picking at her food. It was clear something was on her mind. She finally stopped and looked me in the eye. "Jason, we've been out a few times lately, and whether we call it what it is or not, they have basically been dates. I know it's been a little awkward the last few times when we said goodbye. It felt like we both wanted more than just a kiss, but we were afraid to let things go any further. So, I wanted you to know that I think I need for things to, how do I put this, move a little further along, at least physically." Her words made me a little nervous, but I encouraged her to continue. "Go ahead, Kathy. You know you can ask me anything." Okay, here goes, she said, taking a deep breath. As you know, Sam and I were high school sweethearts, and before all of this, we had only been with each other. I'm not sure if I can give him a second chance or not. Some days I want to try, and some days I just want a fresh start on my own. But I'm still a woman, and I still have certain needs, if you know what I mean. And I think you probably have some of those needs too. I nodded to show I understood, as she paused to collect her thoughts. So, what I wanted to ask you is if you would be willing to help me with those needs. I know it sounds crazy, but there's no way I could ever just pick up a stranger. But you're my friend, and I trust you. Don't worry about hurting my feelings if you say no, I will understand. But I really think this is something that I need, and maybe it would be good for you too. For once in my life, I was speechless. That was the last question I ever expected to be asked. I carefully thought about how to respond before speaking. Kathy, wow, I'm certainly flattered that you feel comfortable enough to ask me to help you with this. Please don't take my hesitation to mean that I'm not interested. I think you are absolutely beautiful, and I've been attracted to you since you first walked into my office. My first instinct is to say yes, but I really need some time to think through all the implications before I give you a final answer. How about if I call you in the morning with my decision? Sure, I understand. I know this is a huge favor I'm asking, and I can certainly understand if you decide not to do it. I just didn't know who else I could turn to. After that, we finished eating and talked a little more before it was time to go. I promised to call her first thing in the morning with my answer. Deep down, I knew I was going to agree as soon as she asked. I had been imagining being with her for weeks now. I just needed to convince myself that I could go through with it and then walk away afterward. I knew that if she decided to commit to her marriage after this, I couldn't see her anymore, not even for lunch. It dawned on me on the way home that evening that perhaps this could help us both move on. So, I called her. Hello. She answered. Hey, Kathy, this is Jason. I've thought about what you asked, and my answer is yes, on one condition. There was silence for a second on the other end before she tentatively asked, so, what is this condition? Well, if we just met at my apartment or your house, it would feel too casual. I need something more to feel comfortable doing this. So, the condition is that I think a change of scenery would do us both some good. If you agree to go away with me this weekend, I will agree to spend time together. Wow, count me in, she replied. I was so sure you were going to say no. I'll just tell Sam that I need to get away to clear my head and that he needs to watch the boys for a few days. What time do you want to leave? I'll text you with the plans tomorrow. And Kathy, I'm really looking forward to this. Bye. As soon as Sally got to work the next day, I had her make all the reservations for the weekend, and then I texted Kathy, telling her to meet me at the airport at noon on Friday. Despite her questions, I insisted that everything was a surprise and she would have to wait until Friday to find out the details. After an agonizingly slow week, there I was, standing in front of the terminal, when I saw her walking towards me in a pair of tight faded jeans, boots, and a form-fitting sweater. You look amazing. By the time we board our flight, you'll be the envy of every man in this airport, I said. She leaned in to give me a hug and whispered in my ear, if you keep talking like that, you might not make it to that plane, mister. So, what's the big surprise? Where exactly are you taking me, Mr. Winters? She asked. I just smiled as I handed her the ticket. New York. You've got to be kidding me. I've always wanted to go there. Well, Mrs. Mason, you'll be pleased to know that we have reservations at some very fine restaurants for the next 3 nights, and we have tickets to see Hamilton on Broadway tomorrow night. I grabbed her bag and headed to check in with a very happy lady at my side. After a smooth flight, we landed at LaGuardia and took a cab to our hotel. It was one of my favorites, located across from Central Park, and our room had a view of the park. It was just after 5 p.m. when we checked into the hotel. We quickly unpacked and freshened up for dinner. Our reservations were for 7 p.m., and the restaurant was only a 10-minute walk from the hotel, so we had plenty of time. Kathy was standing by the window, staring out at the city while I tied my tie. When I walked up beside her, she turned and wrapped her arms around me. "Well, Mr. Winters, I asked for one small favor, and you took it to a completely different level than anything I could have ever imagined. This is absolutely amazing. I could be mistaken, but am thinking that all of this may have just entitled you to a wonderful weekend experience." "That's what I was hoping for, Mrs. Mason," I replied, pulling her closer and gently kissing her. After a few seconds, I pulled away. "We better stop this now and head to dinner, or we might not make it because I'm getting really close to just staying in." We made the 10-minute walk to the restaurant, hand in hand, taking in the sights and sounds of the city. The dinner was amazing, just like I remembered it from the last time I was here. After dessert and way too much wine, we headed back to the hotel. When we got back to the room, I could tell that she was getting nervous. I took both of her hands in mine and looked directly into her eyes. "I want you to know that we won't do anything that you're not comfortable with. If all you want to do is act like tourists and enjoy the city, that's fine with me. If you want to go through with your original request, that's fine too. I just want you to relax and enjoy the weekend, no pressure, okay?" I led her over to the window, moving behind her and wrapping my arms around her waist. "I want you to look out at this beautiful city. This weekend is all about you. I want you to experience things you never have before. Just try to relax and let me take care of everything. I want you to enjoy the food, the sights, the attractions, and the arts. Let's just enjoy the city, and if you want to explore a deeper connection between friends, I will be more than happy to make that happen." I could see the tears forming in the corner of her eyes. "No, Jason, I really want to go through with this, and I need it more than you will ever know. I'm just really nervous. I've only been with one man, and after all that's happened, I just feel so inadequate because I obviously wasn't able to keep him satisfied. Listen, Kathy, I think we are both in the same place. We both feel inadequate in different ways, but what they did is not about us. No matter what was lacking in our marriages, they didn't have the right to go outside of the marriage looking for answers. They should have addressed those with us. If anyone is inadequate, it's the two of them. Now, enough about them. Let's just enjoy being here and being with each other for the next few days." With that, I gently kissed the back of her neck, just behind her right ear. Kathy closed her eyes and leaned back into me, tilting her head, inviting me to continue. "That feels so good," she whispered, closing her eyes and relaxing into my embrace. I continued to gently hold her, allowing her to feel safe and cherished in the moment. We spent some time simply enjoying each other's company, the comfort of being close, and the warmth of the connection between us. Eventually, Kathy turned to me and said, "Why don't you get comfortable while I go freshen up in the bathroom?" I nodded and watched as she disappeared into the bathroom. I took a moment to reflect, thinking about how we had arrived at this point and how important it was to make sure she felt secure and respected. When she emerged, she looked more relaxed, her face showing a mix of determination and vulnerability. As the evening progressed, we continued to share the space, gradually easing into a closeness that felt natural and unhurried. It wasn't about rushing into anything but rather about allowing the emotions and connection to guide us. We talked, laughed, and simply enjoyed being together, appreciating the comfort and companionship. Eventually, we settled in for the night, and as we lay there, side by side, the feeling of being cared for and understood wrapped around us like a blanket. I draped my arm over her, and she nestled into me, the exhaustion of the day gently pulling us both into sleep. When I woke in the morning, I found myself in the same position, with Jason gently kissing my neck and caressing my leg. It was a tender and sweet way to wake up, and after a moment, I got up to take a shower. As I was nearly finished, Jason stepped into the shower with me, a playful smile on his face. We shared a light-hearted moment, washing away the remnants of sleep and getting ready for the day ahead. We had an absolutely wonderful day touring the city, followed by a fabulous dinner and a theater show, where we watched Hamilton. It was incredible, and by the time we returned to the hotel, it was after midnight. Still hyped from the show, we shared a moment of intimacy before falling asleep, satisfied and exhausted. The next morning, after I had finished my shower, Jason had just gotten in when the room phone rang. Surprised, I thought, who would be calling us here? I hesitated for a moment before finally picking up the phone. Hello? Hello, I must have the wrong room. I was looking for Jason Winters, a female voice on the line asked. No, hold on. This is Jason's room. He's in the shower now, but he'll be glad to give him a message, I answered. Well, could you just go get him? This is his daughter, and there's a family emergency. I need to talk to him now. It's really important. Sure, let me go get him. I headed to the bathroom to get Jason, thinking to myself, it looks like we're busted. Jason, your daughter's on the phone. She said there's been some kind of family emergency, and she needs to talk to you right now. I noticed the worry on his face when he heard that his daughter had called. I guessed she had no idea that we were here together. I'll be right there. Now let's hear it from Jason's perspective. I wrapped a towel around my waist, suddenly feeling self-conscious about the situation. I walked out to the bed, sat on the edge, and picked up the phone. Looking at Kathy, I took a deep breath before answering. Hello, Savannah. Hello, Daddy. Yes, dear, I answered. What's wrong? Daddy, it's Mark. He was in a car accident. Oh no. How is he? I asked, my heart sinking. He's going to be fine, but he's in bad shape right now. He has a concussion and some broken ribs, but the biggest issue is that he broke his leg and has to have surgery tomorrow. Listen, baby, I'm going to work on getting a flight out of here today, and I'll be there as soon as I can. Text me which hospital he's in and his room number, and I'll let you know my flight details as soon as I know them. Sure, Daddy. Oh, and Savannah, how are the rest of you holding up? We're hanging in there. We just really need you here. Well, I'm on my way. Please be careful, and let me know as soon as you find out about flights. Oh, and Daddy, who was that woman that answered the phone? Oh, I thought, well, that's a complicated story and probably best told in person. I'll fill you in when I see you. Bye. I quickly explained everything to Kathy and told her I needed to find a flight and get home today. I tried to get her to stay and enjoy the city for another day since the room was already paid for, but she insisted on flying back with me. I was able to get 2 seats on a direct flight that would get us home by 3 p.m., so we quickly finished getting dressed, packed, and headed to the airport. Once the plane had taken off, Kathy put her hand on my knee and laid her head on my shoulder. I'm so sorry about Mark. I'm sure he's going to be okay. Yeah, he's a tough kid. Listen, I'm sorry about our weekend. I really had a great time. I just hope you got what you needed out of it. Don't you worry about me at all, Kathy said with a smile. I simply asked you to scratch a little itch for me, and I promise you, it is well scratched. We then settled in for the 90-minute flight home. Both of us were exhausted and slept almost the entire time. I didn't wake up until I felt the wheels hit the ground. Kathy and I quickly gathered our bags and said our goodbyes. I promised to keep her posted on Mark, and we agreed to talk later in the week. We both needed a little time to process everything that happened in New York and decide where to go from here. I found my car and headed to the hospital to check on Mark. This was going to be really hard. I was about to see Annie for the first time in months, and I really didn't know what to say or how to act. I was also going to have to face Savannah and explain why her father was in New York in a hotel room with a woman she didn't know about. Then, suddenly, in a moment of clarity, it came to me. I needed to put all of that behind me for the moment and focus my attention on my son, who needed my immediate care. Then, I would deal with Annie and all of the unresolved issues and feelings. When I caught her with Sam, I reacted out of anger, cutting off all contact with her. Then, I tried to boost my self-esteem by having casual flings while I was traveling. I had tried to move on and start a relationship with Kathy, but I still hadn't found any peace. It became clear that until I worked through everything with Annie and brought closure to our relationship, I could never truly move on. I got off the elevator and followed the signs to Mark's room. Before I opened the door, I took a moment to gather my courage. I was actually nervous about going in. How had it come to the point where I felt uncomfortable seeing my own family? Okay, Jason, get yourself together. Just go in and be yourself. I took one last breath and opened the door. Daddy! Savannah exclaimed, rushing across the room to wrap her arms around me tightly. Well, hello to you too, baby girl, I said with a smile. I then noticed my other son, Jeff, sitting in one of the chairs. I looked over at him and smiled. What, no hug for the old man? Hey, Dad, he said as he stood up and hugged me too. Looks like Mark's going to be laid up for a while, so I guess when you come up to school, you can just take your favorite son out for a round of golf, huh? Yeah, I laughed. I guess I won't have to take Mark along just to keep him from getting jealous. But when he's back to normal, we'll have to play it cool and ask him to come along too. I turned to Mark's bed, where he appeared to be asleep. Annie was sitting by his side, as I knew she would be. It was obvious that my presence was making her nervous. She hadn't even looked up to acknowledge me. If we were going to get through the next few days, I knew it was up to me to ease the tension. I walked over to the bed, standing beside her. So, Annie, how's our boy? Not too bad at the moment, but he gave us quite the scare yesterday, she answered. For the next couple of hours, we sat around Mark's room, reminiscing about the kids growing up and some of the crazy things they did. After the initial tension, everyone seemed to relax. Around 7 p.m. I insisted that everyone go home. I told Savannah and Jeff to return to school, assuring them that either their mom or I would call as soon as Mark was out of surgery. I also urged Annie to go home. She looked exhausted, and I wasn't ready to be alone with her yet. The next day, Mark's surgery went well, and a few days later, he was released to go home. Annie and I managed to get him settled into his room. Being back in the house brought back some unpleasant memories, but I promised myself I would just suck it up for Mark's sake. After he was settled, I told him goodbye and that I would stop by to see him tomorrow. I was almost out of the house when Annie stopped me to remind me that I had promised to talk with her about what had happened before our divorce was finalized, and that we only had a few weeks left before the court date. Damn, I knew she was right. Okay, I guess I've put this off as long as I can, I thought. How about I come by on Saturday morning, and I'll let you tell me everything you have to say? Yeah, Saturday would work for me. How about around 8 a.m.? I'll fix some breakfast, she offered. Sounds good, Annie. I'll see you then. I spent the next 2 days catching up at work and figuring out what I wanted to say on Saturday. Kathy and I met for dinner on Friday night and talked about the previous weekend. I just wanted to make sure she was all right with everything that had happened, and she was. We both agreed that neither of us was ready for another serious relationship right now, but we also agreed that an occasional date was still on the table. Just to prove it to ourselves, we spent the evening together before she headed home to her boys. True to my word, I showed up at my old house at 8 a.m. Annie met me at the door, and a big breakfast was ready. After I checked on Mark and the three of us ate breakfast, Mark headed to his room to catch up on the classwork he had missed over the past week. Annie and I went out on the patio for some privacy. She sat there nervously for a few seconds, obviously trying to make sure she said everything just right. First of all, I need to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did with Sam. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for all the lies. You need to know that I realize this is all my fault. You did absolutely nothing to deserve what I did. I just want to try to explain why I did what I did, but please don't take any of these as excuses, because there is no excuse for what I've done. At this point, she paused to gauge my reaction. I just sat quietly, waiting for her to continue. This was her moment, and I still wasn't sure if I was ready to go easy on her. Her apology did mean something to me on a certain level, but I wasn't sure if I was ready to accept it yet. I had forgiven her weeks earlier, but that was more for my own sanity. I had been so wrapped up in my anger that it was making me ill at times. Kathy had convinced me that I needed to forgive Annie, helping me understand that forgiving her wasn't about condoning what she did, it was about allowing myself to move on with my life. When she realized that I wasn't going to respond, she decided to continue. Also, just so you know, I've been seeing a counselor for the past couple of months to try to figure out why I did what I did. A lot of this comes from my discussions with her. Great, I thought, now comes the part where all of this is somehow my fault, or her parents' fault, or the kids' fault, so I sat there for the next hour, letting her say everything she wanted to say, just as I promised I would. It was all a load of excuses, of course, but I let her speak. I'm sure it made sense to her. Apparently, this all started when the boys left for college. She felt lonely and depressed. She had spent the past 20 years focusing most of her attention on the children, and now they were all gone and didn't need her anymore. She had always suffered from mild depression, and the kids leaving home only made it worse. I was wrapped up in my work and didn't spend much time with her. Her counselor told her that when children leave home, parents must shift their focus from the children and find fulfillment from other people or activities, preferably from their spouse. According to her, I had my work, which I always turned to for fulfillment, but she had nothing. Her job was just a job to her, a way to keep busy, so she felt bored and lonely. And then Sam came along, inviting her to lunch. She acknowledged that it was wrong but said she was lonely, and he was so attentive. Over a few months, their conversations became more personal as they started complaining to each other about me and Kathy. Then, one Wednesday, they were at a client function, and after a few too many drinks, Sam walked her to her car and kissed her. She didn't know why, but she kissed him back until guilt stopped her, and she pulled away. The rest of her story was sadly predictable. They kept having lunch, they kissed again, which led to more physical encounters. She swore that it was never about love, just loneliness and the way he made her feel good about herself, feel wanted. She didn't enjoy the physical aspect as much as the thrill of doing something she knew was wrong. She still loved me and wanted to stay together and work on our marriage, but by the time she finished, I was feeling more frustrated than understanding. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. So, I only have two questions. First, was this the first time you cheated on me? And second, have you continued seeing Sam after I left the house? What she didn't know was that I already knew the answers. I just wanted to see if she would be honest with me. Oh my God, Jason, please believe me, this was the first and only time that I've cheated. I actually believed her. I had hired a private investigator to dig into her and Sam's past. Kathy and I had provided access to all of our cell phone and banking information, and I gave the investigator access to Annie's personal laptop. He found nothing suspicious on any of Annie's devices or our bank accounts until a couple of weeks before she and Sam came to our house for the first time. At that point, there were tons of late-night messages between them. Okay, Annie, I guess I believe you. I have no reason to think there were any other affairs. Now, how about the second question? We talked a few times to compare notes on how to handle things with you and Kathy, but we haven't actually seen each other since the day that video was recorded. Well, so much for honesty. I knew for a fact that she had seen him twice in our house since I left. Annie, here's my problem. I know that's a blatant lie. Sam was in this house the first 2 Friday nights after I left, and he stayed here the entire night both times. A look of panic spread across her face. Do you remember Bill Stevenson stopping by to remove the cameras after I confronted you? She nodded. Did it ever occur to you that I might send him back to reinstall them when you were at work that next week? Do you think I'm stupid enough to believe that after everything that happened, the two of you wouldn't get together again? I'm so sorry, please let me explain. I was scared and alone. You and Kathy had left us, and we just needed someone to talk to, she said, tears streaming down her face. Well, I know you did more than talk, because unlike you, the cameras don't lie. You know, Annie, I could deal with the truth, but I'm not going to put up with lies. In the grand scheme of things, 2 more times might not seem like a big deal, but lying is a deal breaker. Even at work, I'm fairly tolerant when people make mistakes, but if anyone lies to me, they're gone. I had heard enough. Well, I kept my promise and let you talk, but you've proven that you're not ready to be completely honest. My suggestion is to let our divorce become final at our court date and move on. I've got enough video of you two to start an adult site, and if you try to stall things, I might do just that. Goodbye, Annie. Annie decided to take my advice, and our divorce became final about 2 weeks later. The week after that, Savannah graduated from college, and both Annie and I did our best to focus on her that day. We were both really proud of her. We gave her a European cruise for graduation, and after that, she was going to come work for me full-time. The private investigator found a lot more dirt when it came to Sam. Annie may have thought she was special, but she was his 4th affair in the past 3 years. The investigator found that Sam had been with 2 more women, and that was all Kathy needed to make up her mind and follow through with her divorce. I couldn't resist sending Annie a copy of the investigator's report with a handwritten cover sheet from me. You may want to take a look at this report. Apparently, you weren't as special as you thought. And by the way, you will probably want to get tested for STDs. Kathy and I continued seeing each other regularly over the next few months. I really liked her, and I think the feeling was mutual. We agreed to take things slow for a while until all of the wounds from our divorces healed. She had a lot of really attractive qualities, and I enjoyed spending time with her. She was a lot of fun to be around, and I appreciated our companionship. I did have one more debt to pay. I had been trying to think of how I was going to pay Sam back for all the hurt he caused, preferably one that kept me out of jail. I finally came up with an idea and ran it by Kathy. At this point, I cared too much about her to do anything that would cause her pain. She laughed and said her only regret was that she wouldn't be there to see the look on his face. When the PI was investigating Sam, he discovered that Sam stopped at a particular bar every Friday night after work before heading home to his apartment. So one Friday night, about 2 weeks after Sam and Kathy's divorce was final, I had one of my project managers go with me to pay Sam a visit at the bar. Bob was about my height but probably 50 pounds heavier. We entered the bar and found Sam exactly where the PI said he sat every week. He was in a booth by the windows, sitting by himself. I walked around so I could approach him from the rear, and Bob approached from the opposite direction. When we got to his booth, we both pushed our way in, with me beside Sam and Bob facing him. Well, old friend, do you remember me? I asked. It took a second for it to register in his brain that I was Annie's husband. Then his eyes went wide, and the color drained from his face. Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm really sorry for what I did, so can't we just let the past stay in the past? I flagged the waitress down and told her my friend here wants to buy us a drink. Can you bring us 2 of your best bourbons, and make them doubles? After all, when you wrong someone, the least you can do is buy them a drink. Sam sank a little deeper into the bench. You know, Sam, you don't just get to wrong someone and not have to pay some kind of price. It was a good thing for you that I didn't find you when I first saw that video. My first thought was to take you down in a way that would have landed me in jail, but lucky for you, I'm too old for that. So let me explain to you how things are going to work. You will never speak to, interact with, or see Annie again. Is that clear? Yes, sir, he meekly replied. Good. Now that we've got that clear, there's one other thing. you will never miss, be late with, or be short on paying your alimony and child support to Kathy. Is that clear? Yes, sir, crystal clear. I turned my drink up and finished the last bit, then reached into the bag I had beside me when I walked in, pulled out a box gift wrapped in black paper, and handed it to Sam. Go ahead and open it. Sam cautiously opened the gift and found a box containing a 1.75-liter bottle of Johnnie Walker Black Label. Confused, he said, "I'm not sure I understand. What's this for? Do you remember me just telling you that when you wrong someone, the least you can do is buy them a drink?" He nodded that he understood. Well, since I've had my own share of interactions with your ex-wife over the past 3 months, I figured I owed you a whole bottle. Enjoy.